1943. The skies over Europe burned red with war. Each morning, the cold wind carried the distant hum of engines, the sound of B-17 bombers setting out from England, heading east toward the heart of Nazi Germany. Their silver wings glistened against the pale sun, hundreds of them in tight formation, a mechanical armada crossing into enemy territory. But for every mission that began with hope, many ended in fire. As the bombers neared the French coast, German radar stations picked up their presence within minutes. Across occupied Europe, air raid sirens wailed, and squadrons of Luftwaffe fighters scrambled from hidden airfields. Messerschmitt Bf 109Ns and Focke-Wulf 190s, sleek, deadly, and expertly flown, climbed rapidly into the freezing blue above the clouds. Up there, where the air was thin and the cold could freeze a man's breath, the sky became a killing ground. The American bombers, heavy with bombs and slow to maneuver, depended entirely on their escorts, the P-47 Thunderbolts and the newer P-51 Mustangs. The Mustangs were fast, elegant, and agile, but when it came to altitude, they had a fatal weakness. Above 25,000 feet, their engines began to gasp. The air grew too thin, and the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, their proud heart, couldn't produce the power needed to outclimb the Germans. The Luftwaffe pilots knew this and used it to their advantage. They'd dive down from higher altitude, strike with devastating accuracy, and vanish before the Mustangs could respond. Every day, Allied airmen watched their friends vanish in plumes of smoke and flame. Entire bomber groups returned home shredded by gunfire, many with engines gone, wings torn open, and gunners slumped lifeless over their weapons. In mess halls across England, pilots sat silently after missions, their coffee growing cold, their faces gray from exhaustion. They spoke little, just the occasional mutter. Where was the cover? Climbed too slow again. Can't chase 'em that high. It was clear, the Luftwaffe ruled the upper sky. General James Doolittle and the RAF command knew that if something didn't change, the entire Allied air offensive could collapse. They had the machines, the pilots, the courage, but not the power. Something had to give. In late autumn, as Europe descended into a frozen winter, an unusual crate arrived at a small British airfield in East Anglia. It bore no markings except for a series of letters and numbers stenciled in red, 150 grade, for test only. Few knew what it meant. To most, it looked like just another shipment of aviation fuel. But to the engineers and chemists who gathered in the hangar that night, it was something entirely new. A high-octane experimental, fuel that promised to do the impossible. Rumors had circulated for months about American refineries experimenting with superfuels, mixtures designed to push piston engines beyond their limits. This 150 grade blend was one of them. Volatile, dangerous, and untested at high altitudes, the chief mechanic, a weathered man named Arthur Mac McConnell, peered into a fuel sample through his goggles. "You pour this into a Merlin," he said softly, "and you might just blow the cylinders clean off the block." Across from him, a young pilot, Lieutenant Jack Reynolds, grinned. "Or," he replied, "it might just make her sing." The Mustang pilots stationed there had grown restless. Each mission seemed to end the same, a chase that fell short, a climb they couldn't complete, an enemy always one step ahead. They'd watch from below as German fighters danced in the upper layers of cloud, unreachable. Reynolds was among those who'd had enough. At just 24, he had the easy confidence of a man who'd seen too much and survived too often. "We're dying up there," he told his commander. "Let us try the new fuel. If it burns too hot, we'll find out." His request hung in the air like a challenge. The engineers hesitated. The new fuel was risky. The engine tolerance is untested. But war has a way of pushing men past caution. By midnight, the decision was made. The mechanics worked by lantern light, draining the old 100-octane fuel from Reynolds's P-51D Mustang, nicknamed Lucky Lady. The smell of gasoline filled the hangar as they refueled her with the new amber liquid. Every bolt, every hose was double-checked. Reynolds climbed into the cockpit, the chill seeping through his gloves. "If she doesn't explode," he joked, "I'll see you in the morning." Mac gave him a firm nod. "If she does explode," he said, Make it worth it. The Merlin engine roared to life with a deeper growl than anyone had heard before. Not a smooth hum, but a feral, shaking thunder that made the metal walls vibrate. Flames briefly spat from the exhaust stacks, lighting the faces of the watching crew. Reynolds eased the throttle forward, the propeller blurring into a silver disc. The gauges climbed past their limits, the engine screaming but steady. "She's alive," Reynolds said into the radio. "And she's angry." The Mustang leapt down the runway, lifting effortlessly into the night sky. As the roar faded into the darkness, one thing became clear to everyone watching. Something had changed, something powerful. It would take weeks before the results became public, before reports came back of Mustangs chasing down German interceptors, before the Allies realized they'd just unlocked a secret weapon hiding in plain sight. But that night, in a lonely airfield surrounded by fog and silence, the first step had been taken. The age of the 490 Manaf demon had begun, and the Germans had no idea what was coming. The winter of 1944 crept slowly over the English countryside. At the RAF base in East Anglia, frost painted the runways silver, and the breath of mechanics hung like smoke in the icy morning air. Each day began with the same metallic chorus, wrenches clanking, engines coughing to life, and the low rumble of warplanes being coaxed awake. But inside one particular hangar, something different was happening, something the rest of the base wasn't supposed to know about. Wooden crates had arrived under armed escort 2 nights earlier. They bore no national markings, only stenciled letters in crimson. U.S. Army Air Forces, 150 grade fuel, experimental use only. The men who opened those crates didn't cheer. They just stared in silence at the amber liquid sloshing inside the drums. To the untrained eye, it looked like regular aviation fuel. But to the engineers, it was liquid dynamite, the chemistry of power. The standard aviation fuel, 100 octane, had powered most Allied aircraft for years. Reliable, stable, predictable, but limited, the new 150 grade fuel was a monster of chemistry, refined with special additives, rich in tetraethyl lead and other compounds the average mechanic couldn't even pronounce. It allowed engines to run at far higher compression ratios. In simple words, it could make a plane fly faster, higher, and stronger, if it didn't blow the engine apart first. Chief Engineer Arthur Mac McConnell leaned over a blueprint of the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, his cigarette glowing faintly in the dim light. "If this stuff works," he muttered, "we'll be pushing more than 70 inches of boost. The supercharger might melt before the plane even takes off." One of the younger mechanics laughed nervously. "Then maybe we should have the fire trucks ready." Mac didn't smile. "We'll need more than fire trucks, lad." Captain Reynolds returns by the time Captain Jack Reynolds returned from his last escort mission. The whispers had already reached him. He had seen the chaos firsthand, the high-altitude dogfights, the bombers torn apart by German 20mm cannons, the endless cycle of victory and loss. That evening, he walked straight into the hangar, gloves still on, flight jacket zipped to his chin. "So," he said, "this is the miracle fuel everyone's talking about?" Mac looked up from his notes. "Miracle's not the word I'd use. More like madness in a barrel." Reynolds chuckled. "Madness got us this far." The men gathered around as he ran his hand along the polished nose of his Mustang. Lucky lady. She had brought him home from 12 missions. Her fuselage scarred by bullets, but her spirit unbroken. "If she can handle it," Reynolds said quietly, "we'll know it's safe for the rest." Mac sighed. "If she can't, we'll be picking you out of the mud with a spoon." Reynolds grinned. "Then let's make it worth the risk." Preparing for the test the next morning, the base was still cloaked in fog when the ground crew began their work. The smell of fuel filled the air as the mechanics drained the old tanks and replaced every drop with the new 150 grade blend. The color of it seemed different, richer, almost golden in the morning light. "Looks like whiskey," one mechanic joked. Mac shot him a look. "If you drink this, you'll glow in the dark for a week." Every line, every valve, every fitting was checked twice. The Merlin engine, already a masterpiece of engineering, was about to be pushed beyond anything Rolls-Royce had imagined. When everything was ready, Mac placed his clipboard down and nodded. "She's yours, Captain." Reynolds climbed into the cockpit, strapping himself in tightly. The cold metal seat bit through his flight suit. He adjusted his goggles, flipped the ignition switches, and muttered to himself, "Let's find out what she's got." The first roar, the starter motor whined. The propeller spun once, twice. Then the Merlin engine roared to life. But it wasn't the same sound they were used to. It was deeper, sharper, a growl that shook the walls of the hangar. The exhaust stack spat blue flame, and the entire aircraft trembled as if eager to break free. The crew stepped back instinctively. Mac shouted over the noise, "Throttle to 20 inches only!" But Reynolds pushed it to 30, then 40. The gauges trembled. The boost needle climbed past the usual limit. At 50 inches, the plane should have stalled or sputtered. Instead, the sound became almost musical, a perfect, violent harmony of metal and power. "Look at those numbers," one mechanic yelled. "She's still stable." Reynolds laughed into his radio. "Stable? She's singing, Mac." He eased the throttle forward a little more, feeling the aircraft strain against the brakes. The roar grew to a furious scream. The vibrations rattled the hangar lights and several tools fell from a workbench. "Cut it." "Cut it now!" Mac bellowed. Reynolds shut down the engine, and silence fell. Thick, heavy, and unbelievable. The men stood frozen, their faces half lit by the glow of the cooling exhaust pipes. Then Reynolds opened the canopy, grinning like a man who had just seen the future. "She's ready," he said, "and she's faster than hell." The secret mission, the test results, were written up and sent directly to the Air Ministry under strict classification. Only a handful of people were allowed to know. Within days, other squadrons received the same mysterious fuel drums, each shipment marked "Special use, do not discuss." Reynolds was chosen to lead the first operational test, a real combat escort using the upgraded P-51Ds. Their mission, to escort B-17 bombers to Berlin and back. As the crews prepared, the tension was electric. Nobody knew whether the new fuel would give them wings or turn their engines into flaming wrecks mid-air. Reynolds gave a short briefing before takeoff. "Boys," he said, "if this works, we'll be rewriting the rulebook. If it doesn't, well, at least we'll make one hell of a story." The men laughed nervously, checking their planes one last time. The sunrise cut through the fog as the Mustangs rolled out onto the runway, their silver skins glinting, their engines growling with an unfamiliar, dangerous strength. Mac watched from the control tower, clutching his headset. "God help us," he whispered. "They're flying with lightning in their tanks." And as the first P-51 lifted into the dawn sky, leaving trails of golden exhaust behind, no one yet knew that the world of aerial combat was about to change forever. The 150-grade fuel had turned mere machines into monsters of the sky. And soon, the Germans would learn what true speed looked like. February 1944. The cold over England had a way of biting through even the thickest flight jacket. Across the fog-covered runways of East Anglia, the Mustang pilots prepared in silence. There were no speeches this time, no jokes, no bravado. Every man knew what this mission meant. For the first time, they would take the new 150-grade fuel into combat. The mission briefing was short and sharp. Target Berlin, escort duty for the 91st Bomb Group. Altitude 28,000 feet. The air officer paused. "Gentlemen, if this works, you'll be writing history today." At 0600 hours, the squadron of 12 P-51D Mustangs lined up on the runway, their silver fuselages glinting under the weak sunrise. Each bore nose art, tigers, pin-up girls, names of wives and sweethearts back home. At the front sat Captain Jack Reynolds in his beloved Lucky Lady. He took a slow breath, checking the gauges one last time. Fuel, full. Boost pressure, steady. Engine temperature, good. "Mac," he said into his radio, "you still awake down there?" From the control tower, Mac's voice crackled through. "Wide awake, Captain. Don't make me regret giving you that rocket fuel." Reynolds grinned beneath his oxygen mask. "No promises." He pushed the throttle forward. The Merlin engine growled, then roared. The Mustang surged down the runway, its tires skimming over frost and oil-stained tarmac. One by one, the planes lifted gracefully into the sky, banking east toward the rising sun. Below, Mac watched them fade into the golden horizon, whispering to himself, "Go get 'em, boys." Crossing into enemy territory, the flight across the channel was quiet, too quiet. Reynolds' voice came through the squadron channel. "Keep formation tight. No cowboy stuff until we hit Berlin airspace." At 25,000 feet, the bombers came into view. Great silver herds of B-17 flying fortresses lumbering through the sky. Their wings bristled with guns, engines humming like a mechanical symphony. The Mustangs fell into escort position, small, fast, and deadly shadows protecting the giants. Then, over the radio, came the report from one of the tail gunners. "German radars got us. Expect company in 5 minutes." Reynolds adjusted his oxygen mask. "Roger that. Keep your eyes sharp." Miles away, inside a German airfield near Bremen, alarms were already blaring. Pilots ran from barracks to their planes. Messerschmitt, Bf-109Gs and FW-190As, painted in grey camouflage and marked with the Black Cross of the Reich. Squadron leader Otto Kruger, one of Germany's top aces, barked into his radio. "They think they can reach Berlin. Not today." Within minutes, dozens of German fighters were airborne, climbing fast to intercept the incoming bombers. At 28,000 feet, the two forces met. The sky erupted. Tracer fire streaked across the clouds like burning comets. Bombers opened up with their 50 caliber guns, filling the air with a deadly storm of lead. German fighters dove in from above, their cannons tearing into the formation. Reynolds heard the cries over the radio. "Bandits! High 12 o'clock! Two 190s on my tail! Eagle lead! We've got smoke on the right wing!" Then came the moment of truth. Reynolds slammed the throttle forward, past the mark no pilot had dared touch before. The boost needle climbed, 60 inches, 65, 70. The Merlin engine screamed, not in pain, but in power. The Mustang surged forward like it had been shot from a cannon. "Holy hell," Reynolds muttered, eyes wide. "She's flying like a demon." He pulled into a steep climb, higher than ever before. The altimeter spun, 27,000, 28,000, 30,000 feet. The German pilots above turned in shock. Their Messerschmitts, once the kings of altitude, suddenly had competition. Reynolds dove straight through their formation, guns blazing. His 6 Browning 50 calibers spat fire, tearing through the wing of a Bf-109. The enemy plane exploded in a burst of flame and smoke. Over the radio, one of his wingmen shouted, "You see that? They can't touch us up here." Another pilot laughed. "We're out climbing them. Jesus, we're faster than their bullets." At full throttle, the Mustang's speedometer hit 490 miles per hour. The German ace Kruger tried to turn and follow, but his engine coughed under the strain. He couldn't keep up. "Was ist das?" he shouted in disbelief. They're too fast!" The Mustangs sliced through the Luftwaffe formation like silver lightning. For the first time, the bombers were safe. Instead of being easy prey, they had guardians moving at impossible speed. Reynolds' squadron weaved through the sky, striking, climbing, vanishing, then diving again with fury and precision. Down below, onlookers in German cities stared up in confusion. The usual whine of battle had changed, replaced by a deeper, faster roar echoing through the clouds. Within 30 minutes, the Luftwaffe began retreating. Fuel gauges dipped, ammunition ran low. Their formations broke apart. Kruger, wounded and out of ammo, limped back toward base. His voice, bitter and broken, filled the radio. "These are not the same Americans. Something has changed." By afternoon, the bombers reached Berlin. Their payloads fell with deadly accuracy, shattering factories and railway lines. And above them, still circling untouchable, flew the P-51 Mustangs. When the mission ended, Reynolds led his men home through the setting sun. The radio was silent. No victory cheers, no chatter. Only the steady hum of engines and the quiet knowledge that the world had just shifted. Back at base, Mac waited at the runway's edge. One by one, the Mustangs touched down, their exhausts glowing faintly. When Reynolds climbed out, his face was streaked with sweat and oil. Mac asked softly, "So?" Reynolds smiled, exhausted, proud. "She hit 490, never broke a sweat." Mac let out a long breath. "Then we've done it." Later that night, the squadron's after-action report landed on the desk of an RAF intelligence officer. The final line read, 150-grade fuel operationally tested. Result, outstanding. Mustang performance increased beyond all expectation. Luftwaffe units caught completely off guard. And below it, in Reynolds' handwriting, a single sentence. "The sky belongs to us now." That day over Berlin, the balance of the air war changed forever. The Germans had once ruled the sky with arrogance and steel, but now the Allies had unleashed a new kind of fury. The P-51 Mustang, once merely a protector, had become a predator. And in the bitter winter of 1944, the Luftwaffe learned the truth too late. You can't fight lightning. By March 1944, something strange began happening over the skies of Europe. The Luftwaffe, once the terror of the Allied airmen, was losing its grip. Their best aces, their sharpest machines, their proud formations, all were being shredded by a new kind of enemy. The Germans didn't understand it at first. To them, it seemed impossible. For months, they had held air superiority with iron precision. Their Bf-109s and FW-190s had ruled the upper altitudes, striking the slow American bombers like hawks on pigeons. Allied escorts could barely climb high enough to protect their own. But now, things were different. Every time German radar detected a wave of bombers, they also found something else. Fast-moving specks of silver that dove, climbed, and vanished at speeds no one thought possible. And no matter how high the German fighters tried to climb, the silver demons followed. The whispers begin at Luftwaffe command. Confusion turned to alarm. Reports from pilots came in daily, filled with disbelief. "The Americans have new engines. Their Mustangs climb like jets. They're faster than our bullets." Some claimed they'd seen flames shooting from the Allied exhausts. Others whispered of a witch's fuel, or even American witchcraft. German engineers tore apart captured wrecks, searching for hidden turbochargers or propeller designs. But there was nothing unusual. No new engine, no secret mechanical breakthrough. The truth was far simpler, and far more dangerous. It wasn't new metal. It was new fire. Inside every P-51 Mustang now burned 150-grade fuel. A supercharged mixture so potent it turned the familiar Merlin engine into a monster. By April 1944, entire squadrons of P-51Ds had been converted to use the new blend. The difference was instant, at 30,000 feet. Where the cold was biting and thin, the Mustangs no longer wheezed for air. Instead, they howled. Their climb rates jumped. Their top speeds shattered records. Their engines held steady even at boost pressures that once would have torn them apart. To Allied pilots, it felt like flying a new kind of beast. Captain Jack Reynolds described it best in his mission diary. "It's like strapping yourself to thunder. You push the throttle, and she doesn't argue, she launches." Soon, the once outnumbered Allied escorts became the hunters, the Luftwaffe's proud Abbeville. Boys, the elite fighter wings stationed along the French coast, began falling one by one. Mustang squadrons swept the skies clean before the bombers even arrived at Germany's most famous pilots. Men like Gerhard Bachorn and Erich Hartmann found themselves fighting ghosts. Hartmann, the Black Devil, once shot down dozens of bombers in a single week. But by spring, even he admitted, these new Mustangs are faster in every way. You see them once, and then you're dead. One after another, Luftwaffe aces fell. Some bailed out over their own homeland. Others simply vanished in clouds of smoke. In England, the mood was different, hopeful, confident. Electric squadrons returned home not with stories of survival, but of domination. The pilots who had once stared silently at empty chairs in the mess hall now laughed again, clinking metal mugs and saying, "We gave 'em hell today." And in the hangars, the mechanics those quiet men with oil-stained hands, watched with pride as their machines came home intact. Engines purring like lions. They knew the secret. They'd seen it in the barrels marked 150 grade, experimental. By June 1944, the Allied command was ready for its greatest gamble, the invasion of Europe, Operation Overlord. To succeed, they needed total control of the sky. Every German radar, gun, and fighter had to be pushed back. For weeks, swarms of P-51s patrolled the skies above Normandy, cutting down anything with a black cross. German supply trains, convoys, airfields all fell under relentless assault. Reynolds led his squadron in wave after wave. Their Mustangs flying at nearly 490 miles per hour, he radioed to base after one mission. No sign of resistance. We own the air, Mac. They can't touch us anymore. Back at East Anglia, Mac listened in silence. The same man who had once doubted the fiery fuel. Now he smiled faintly, his voice cracking with pride. Told you she'd sing, Captain. By late summer, the Luftwaffe was bleeding to death. Fuel shortages, inexperienced pilots, and constant losses turned the once feared German Air Force into a shadow of its former self. Where they once flew in hundreds, now they scrambled in handfuls. Even then, they were hunted before they could climb above the clouds. On the ground, German civilians looked up at the contrails crisscrossing the sky, hundreds of white lines that marked the slow death of their air superiority. The Sky Kings of 1940 were now ghosts in 1944. After the invasion, Reynolds' squadron gathered on the runway one evening, watching the sunset through the haze of engine smoke. He turned to his crew and said, "Remember last year? We used to be the ones running." Mac nodded, wiping grease from his hands. "Now they're the ones running." The pilots laughed softly, tired but proud. They didn't talk about the science or the politics, or even the war itself. They just looked up at a sky that finally belonged to them. By the end of 1944, the Allies had achieved what once seemed impossible: complete dominance of the European airspace. The secret wasn't a new weapon or an experimental jet. It was the brilliance of chemistry, the courage to test it, and the men who dared to push their engines past the limit. For every P-51 Mustang that roared across the clouds that year, there was a story of risk and reward. In the post-war years, when journalists asked Reynolds what had changed the course of the air war, he simply smiled and said, "It wasn't magic. It wasn't luck. It was just better fuel and the will to use it." By the summer of 1944, the Allied flag ruled the skies over Europe, and as German cities burned and Allied bombers flew unchallenged to Berlin, one truth echoed in every control tower, hangar, and cockpit from London to Normandy. The tide had turned. The P-51 Mustang, powered by the fire of 150 grade fuel, had become the demon of the skies, and the Germans never saw it coming.